Hello, it's me, your friend Henry, coming at you live once again from the lands of the Yorta Yorta people. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land, of course. I'm a doctor. I'm working in my first year as a doctor, making way more money than I need, as many of us do. The best things in life are free, of course. It's a cliche, but it's absolutely true. And I absolutely live by that. We have such an enormous opportunity in this life of ours, if we've been lucky enough to have been born, for example, in a country like Australia. We have such an enormous opportunity to use resources that we don't necessarily need to help other people that are in desperate need of resources that we probably take for granted. I'm giving half of my income this year to charity because I think it's probably the right thing to do. I'm giving to great organisations, and I'm giving even more to really, really great organisations, and that's the pyramid scheme. And I want to make a shout out this day here to my boy, my man, Peter Singer. If you know anything about Peter Singer, you'll probably recognise that my entire personality, everything I'm doing is based on this man. He is a philosopher and an ethicist, and he's really popularised the idea over the last decade or so of using the resources that we have to try and make the world a better place, to try and save lives, to try and improve people's lives. And he really emphasises the enormous power we have to do that. He wrote a book called The Life You Can Save, which I recommend everyone read, or at least read the plot synopsis of it on Wikipedia. And he has this organisation also called The Life You Can Save, and this organisation recommends charities around the world, mostly in developing countries, where there's kind of low-hanging fruit in a way for making the world a better place. You know, a lot of these places have resources absent that we take for granted that can be supplied with relatively small amounts of money. Small sacrifices on our part can have enormous impacts for people, and they recommend various organisations around the world that are really cost effective in the good that they do. And this is heavily influential on me. If you look through the pyramid scheme and you look at some of the charities I've given to, there is a very large overlap with the organisations that Peter Singer's organisation recommends. I'm giving to two organisations, both of which are recommended by The Life You Can Save this paycheck. One of them is Innovations for Poverty Action, and the other is the Fistula Foundation. Now, Innovations for Poverty Action, for all those Henry heads out there, you'll recognise this because I've given to this organisation numerous times before. It's one of my favourites. They're kind of a research organisation in a lot of ways. They were founded by a development economist, Dean Carlin, from the US. And it's based on this idea that often what we think works in theory to improve people's lives around the world doesn't necessarily work in practice. And it's become a bit of a trend over the last couple of decades that in global development now, it seems like the best thing to do is just to try ideas out that we think might work and get evidence on what actually works. And then when things do work on a small scale, we try and scale them up. Innovations for Poverty Action has run or is running over 830 different trials all around the world. And this is a map of all the places in the world that they've run these trials. And they do things like they offer microloans to women to empower them financially. They do sexual health education programs. They run leadership programs at high schools. And when one of these programs works, they take the evidence to the local government and they say, look, this intervention works and we can prove it. And maybe you should implement this as policy, which is particularly useful because a lot of change in the world isn't going to come from non-government organisations. A lot of change in the world is going to have to come from governments and from policy change. And Innovations of Poverty Action is really interesting in the way that it works like that. It encourages government level change through research, through trials, through evidence. And they have real examples of where research that they've done has led to actual policy change in the areas they've worked. And I'd highly recommend anyone have a little look over their website at the different examples they provide. It's very cool. Very cool. And then the other organisation I'm giving to this paycheck is the Fistula Foundation. Again, recommended by The Life You Can Save as an organisation that does enormous good for relatively small amounts of money. What they do is they treat women with a condition called obstetric fistula. And this is a really awful condition, and it's not something we really think about a lot, particularly in Australia. It's not really something we even learn about much in medical school in Australia because it doesn't really happen in places where women have access to hospitals, where women give birth either in hospitals or under the care of midwives and in range of hospitals. The human pelvis is very narrow ever since we learnt to walk on two legs, and the head of a baby is not that much smaller than the opening of the pelvis. Sometimes the baby's head is bigger. And what that means is that sometimes babies get stuck during labour. Now, what happens in a hospital if a baby gets stuck is that often the woman is rushed to the emergency operating theatre and an emergency caesarean section is performed, and usually the mother and the baby both survive. But if you're giving birth in an area where there is no hospital and there is no access to caesareans, a few really awful things happen. And one is that the baby will die because it can't get any oxygen. And the next thing that happens is that because of the enormous pressures involved, the tissues are damaged around the vaginal canal. And what ends up happening is these holes form between the vaginal canal and between the urinary tract, or between the bowel, between the rectum. And these holes, these communications between either the bladder and the vagina or between the rectum and the vagina, these are called fistulas. And they're called obstetric fistulas because they're related to pregnancy. And they cause women to become incontinent of feces or urine. And so not only do these women have to deal with the death of a baby, but now they have to deal with the fact that they're incontinent. And not only that, often what happens to these women is, because it's such an uncomfortable topic and the community doesn't really know how to deal with it, and there's nothing they can do about it, often these women are shunned in their communities and they're relegated to some dark corner of the community where they have to live out their lives alone and in shame. And it's an unimaginable kind of hell that countless women have had to go through since the dawn of time. The Fistula Foundation repairs obstetric fistulas. It's a relatively simple surgical procedure as long as you are trained and have a well-functioning hospital. And an important character in the whole movement to treat obstetric fistulas around the world is this woman, Catherine Hamlin. And Catherine Hamlin is an obstetrician gynecologist from Australia. And 60 years ago, she moved to Ethiopia and she learnt the stories of these women who had been through this horrible process. And she started a hospital in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. And she treated up until last year. She worked into her 90s and she died in 2020. She treated thousands of patients, thousands of women with obstetric fistula, and she gave them their lives back. She's an absolute hero, I think, and a huge inspiration to me. And the Fistula Foundation was founded to fund her hospital, the Addis Ababa Fistula Hospital, but it's now expanded to fund fistula repair operations all around Africa and Central Asia. And it's such an incredible kind of thing to be able to do, to give someone's their life back and their dignity back with just one surgical procedure. And it's a beautiful organisation, and I'm very happy to give them a little bit of money, which is not really worth all that much to me, but might potentially be worth an enormous amount to someone else in the world. And I guess that's the entire principle of what I'm doing. And I'm always very happy to hear from you guys out there about what you think of what I'm doing. Is this maybe this is all the wrong thing to do? Giving to the Fistula Foundation, giving to Innovative Poverty Action. Henry, you need to look after yourself. You need to treat yourself. Buy yourself something nice. No, I don't think so. I live a very comfortable, happy life, as most of us do. I think it's an incredibly fulfilling thing to use the resources we have to try and make the world a better place. Much love to you all. Until next time, peace out.